Daniel Royce had always imagined himself as the man the world admired, but on this night he didn't have to imagine. It was reality. The ballroom shimmered with golden chandeliers and the polished laughter of the city's most powerful people. Every detail, from the imported orchids on the tables to the crystal flutes brimming with champagne, was engineered to remind his guests that they were in the presence of a man who had not only made it, but owned it. Flashes erupted like fireworks as photographers captured him in his tailored charcoal tuxedo, the satin lapels catching the light. He grinned with calculated ease, each smile sharpened to mask the triumph thrumming beneath his skin. To the crowd he was elegance. To himself he was victorious. His young bride stood beside him, radiant in ivory silk that draped like water over her figure. Her beauty was the sort that made men turn their heads and women whisper, and Daniel relished knowing that she was his, a prize that completed the image he had spent a lifetime building. The cameras lingered on her, but Daniel knew they would always circle back to him. They had to. This was his stage. If this story resonated with you, subscribe to the channel and spread the word and tell us where you're watching from. He raised his glass and silence rippled across the ballroom. To love, he declared, voice smooth and steady, and to finding the courage to pursue what we deserve. A sly smile tugged at the corners of his mouth as his gaze flicked briefly over the sea of faces, searching. He knew she was here somewhere. She had to be. He made sure of it. Daniel had insisted that Emily, his ex-wife, receive an invitation. Some of his friends had called it reckless, others cruel, but to him it was perfect. She would watch him tonight, not as his equal, not as his partner, but as the woman left behind. This glittering empire of glass and light, was proof that he had been right to cast her aside. The thought filled him with a satisfaction almost sweeter than the wedding itself. For years, Emily had stood by his side with quiet loyalty, always urging him to think of others, to be cautious, to stay humble. She had been a mirror reflecting back a version of him he had long since outgrown. He didn't want humility. He wanted power, and power required sacrifice. Now, surrounded by men in tailored suits and women dripping in jewels, Daniel felt the intoxicating weight of validation. His empire had been built not just on his business ventures, but on the mythology of Daniel Royce, the man who could take whatever he wanted and leave the rest behind. A waiter passed, and Daniel caught his reflection in the silver tray. Confident eyes, square jaw, the faintest trace of arrogance sharpening his smile. He liked what he saw. The bride leaned closer, whispering in his ear. "They love you." "Of course they do," he replied smoothly, his tone carrying the edge of certainty that came from a man who believed the world was his to command. He kissed her cheek, making sure the cameras caught it. Everything, after all, was performance. But beneath the performance there was something darker. A man does not invite the woman he discarded unless he seeks not just to move on, but to prove a point. Daniel wanted Emily to feel small tonight. He wanted her to sit in the shadows of this ballroom, watching as he flaunted the life she could never give him. Music swelled, violins and piano cascading through the air. Guests toasted, laughter returned, and Daniel slipped back into the rhythm of celebration. He danced, he smiled, he charmed. Yet every so often his eyes flickered toward the edges of the room, searching for a familiar face. She was here. He could feel it. When he didn't see her immediately, irritation pricked at him. Perhaps she hadn't come. Perhaps she had finally found the strength to ignore him. The thought unsettled him more than he cared to admit. For all his arrogance, Daniel needed her presence. Her absence would deny him the satisfaction of crushing her beneath the weight of his triumph. And then, as he raised his glass once more, he caught sight of movement at the far end of the hall. A lone figure slipped quietly into the shadows near the back row, choosing a seat away from the glimmer and the noise. His chest tightened. Even at a distance, he knew it was her, Emily. The corner of his mouth curved upward in a smile only he understood. She had come. She was watching. And in that moment, Daniel Royce felt truly invincible. The orchestra shifted into a brighter melody. The bride's laughter rang out, and the night pressed forward. But the shadow of the woman in the back lingered at the edges of his mind, a presence he could not ignore. He told himself it was victory, but a whisper in the depths of his thoughts wondered if her silence was something far more dangerous. The envelope arrived on a Tuesday afternoon, slipped through the slot like any other piece of mail, At first, Emily thought little of it. She had learned to live quietly, tucked away in a small home that bore none of the extravagance she had once known. But when her eyes landed on the embossed lettering, Daniel Royce and Cassandra Hale together in love, her hands trembled. It wasn't a mistake. Daniel had made sure of that. Emily sat at her kitchen table, the afternoon light casting long slants across the wood, staring at the heavy cardstock as if it were a weapon. The gold foil glimmered, mocking her with its grandeur. He had invited her not as a courtesy, but as a performance. Daniel wanted her there to witness what he had become without her, to see him draped in wealth and beauty, crowned by the approval of a world that had turned its back on her. Her first instinct was to tear it in half, to bury it in the trash and let it rot among discarded bills and empty envelopes. She whispered to herself, "Don't give him what he wants." Yet the longer she sat there, the heavier the invitation felt, as though it demanded an answer. That night she couldn't sleep. Memories pressed in, their wedding day years ago when Daniel's smile was softer, his hand gentler in hers. She remembered the promises, the quiet beginnings, the way she had believed that loyalty and love could carry them through the storm of ambition. But loyalty had not been enough. Not for Daniel. She rose from bed and paced the floor, the words of the invitation echoing in her mind. Cassandra Hale. The name stung, not because she envied the woman, but because Daniel had chosen someone who fit the image he always craved. Polished, glamorous, a mirror of wealth. Emily, with her modest upbringing and quiet resilience, had never been enough for that stage. By morning, exhaustion clung to her, but clarity had settled in its place. She couldn't ignore the invitation, because ignoring it meant allowing Daniel to control the narrative once again. He had silenced her before, drowned her beneath his charisma and arrogance. Attending wasn't about revenge. It was about standing in the room without shrinking, about proving to herself that she was no longer the woman he could break. Still, fear lingered. What would people say? She imagined the whispers, the stolen glances, the pity masked as politeness. But beneath the fear was something stronger. Resolve. She called her closest friend, Mara, whose voice cracked with concern the moment Emily mentioned the wedding. "You don't have to go," Mara urged. "He wants to humiliate you. Don't give him the chance." Emily closed her eyes, gripping the phone. "Maybe. But I've lived in his shadow long enough. This isn't about him anymore. It's about me." There was silence on the other end, then a sigh of reluctant understanding. Mara knew better than to argue when Emily's mind was set. The day of the wedding approached faster than she expected. Emily prepared not with gowns or jewels, but with quiet determination. She chose a simple black dress, elegant but understated. She wanted no spectacle, no competition. She wanted to walk into that room as herself, unmasked and unafraid. When the morning arrived, she held the invitation one last time before slipping it into her purse. It no longer felt like a weapon. It felt like a key, one that would unlock something she had buried for years, her own voice. As she stepped out into the crisp air, the city buzzing with its usual indifference, Emily felt the weight of the past lift slightly from her shoulders. She wasn't walking into his world to beg, to fight, or to prove she had worth. She was walking in to remember that she had always had it. The car engine hummed as she turned the key, the road stretching ahead like a dare. Somewhere across town, Daniel was preparing his stage, convinced he would be untouchable. Emily, steady and silent, was on her way, and though she did not know it yet, her presence would unravel everything. The drive to the wedding was long, but Emily's mind stretched it further, each mile pulling her deeper into memories she had tried to bury. The invitation lay folded in her purse, a silent reminder of the man she once believed she knew. She tightened her grip on the steering wheel and the past began to whisper. It started with the little things. Daniel's tone of voice when she offered an opinion, light, dismissive, like a man humoring a child. At first she excused it as stress, as the weight of his career pressing on his shoulders. But over time the dismissals grew sharper, slicing through her confidence until she questioned her every word. "Don't be dramatic, Emily. You wouldn't understand. Let me handle it. You should be grateful for what you have." The words replayed in her head now like a cruel refrain. She had loved him then, loved him so much that she accepted those barbs as part of the cost of marriage. It was only later she realized that love should not come with the erosion of self. The flashbacks came like jolts. One evening, Daniel had stormed in late from a meeting, tie loose, eyes wild with irritation. She had set the table, cooked his favorite meal, waited hours to share a simple moment. He barely glanced at her efforts before tossing his jacket across a chair. "You're suffocating me with all this domestic nonsense," he snapped. The hurt in her chest had been immediate, but worse was the apology she heard tumble from her lips. Apologies she had whispered again and again for things she never did wrong. Now, years later, she understood. It wasn't that Daniel was overwhelmed. It was that he thrived on control. To diminish her was to remind himself of his power. Her phone buzzed on the seat beside her, pulling her from the spiral. Mara's name lit the screen. Emily hesitated before answering, her voice soft. "I'm on my way." There was a pause, then Mara's urgent whisper. "Emily, listen to me. You don't owe him this. You don't need to walk into that room and let him feed off you again." "I know," Emily said quietly. "Then why are you doing it?" Mara's voice cracked. "He'll humiliate you. He'll twist it all into his game, and you'll leave worse than before. Please don't give him that satisfaction." Emily stared at the road ahead, headlights sweeping over the asphalt. "Because if I stay away, he wins. If I let fear dictate me, then he still owns me. I can't live in his shadow anymore." Mara's sigh trembled through the line. "I just don't want to see you hurt again." Emily swallowed hard. "I've been hurt already. This time I need to stand." They said goodbye, but Mara's words lingered like a warning. Emily knew her friend was right about one thing. Daniel's cruelty wasn't accidental. He was deliberate, calculated. He had invited her for a reason, and that reason had nothing to do with forgiveness. The night pressed heavier as she neared the venue. Her thoughts spun with images of Daniel's smirk, the gleam in his eyes when he'd win an argument, the way he could twist truth into lies until she doubted herself entirely. The whispers of her past grew louder with each passing mile, reminding her that men like Daniel didn't change. They only became more dangerous when challenged. Emily parked outside the glittering hotel where the wedding was held. For a moment she sat in silence, hands gripping the steering wheel until her knuckles whitened. Fear licked at her spine, but beneath it surged a steadier force, resolve. She took a deep breath, smoothed her dress, and stepped out into the night air. The building loomed above her, windows blazing with light and laughter. Somewhere inside, Daniel Royce was waiting, certain of his victory. Emily pressed her purse against her side and walked forward, her shadow stretching long across the pavement. She didn't yet know what awaited her in that ballroom, but she understood one thing with piercing clarity. The whispers of her past had followed her here for a reason. And tonight, those whispers would finally find their voice. The hotel ballroom glowed like a palace. Crystal chandeliers spilled light across velvet-draped tables, every surface polished to perfection. Imported orchids cascaded from tall vases, their petals soft and white as snow. The air itself seemed perfumed with wealth, a carefully curated fragrance of champagne, roses, and ambition. Daniel Royce thrived in this atmosphere. He moved through the crowd with the ease of a man who knew he owned every gaze that followed him. Private violinists played in the corner, their bows gliding across strings as if even music bowed to his command. Guests, politicians, actors, investors leaned in to shake his hand, to congratulate him, to bask in his orbit. The bride, Cassandra Hale, was everything Daniel wanted the world to see. Radiant, young, her silk gown hugging her like liquid light. She laughed when he leaned down to whisper in her ear, her face framed by a halo of carefully styled curls. Together they gleamed like a portrait of success. But beneath the glamour there was something suffocating in the air. The laughter felt rehearsed, the compliments too sharp, the smiles brittle at the edges. The performance dazzled, but it demanded silence from anything that didn't fit. At the very back of the room, far from the chandeliers and clinking glasses, Emily sat quietly. She had chosen a seat near the shadows where the light fell soft and forgiving. Her black dress was simple, her posture composed, but her hands trembled in her lap. Beside her sat a young boy, no more than 6 years old. His small fingers gripped hers tightly, as though he could sense the tension vibrating in her bones. He leaned against her arm, his wide eyes darting nervously around the grand room. And in his face, the curve of his jaw, the shape of his eyes, was a resemblance that could not be denied. He looked just like Daniel had at that age. Emily smoothed his hair with a trembling hand. "It's okay," she whispered softly, though the words felt more like a prayer to herself than comfort to him. The boy nodded, though his grip on her hand only tightened. He didn't fully understand why they were here, only that his mother's voice had carried a seriousness he rarely heard when she told him to put on his best clothes and be brave. Up front, Daniel raised his glass again, drawing the room into his orbit. His voice carried with the confidence of a man who had always been listened to. To love, to fortune, and to futures brighter than the stars above us. The crowd erupted in applause, their glasses clinking in obedient harmony. Emily lowered her gaze. The sound of his voice still struck her like a knife, so familiar, so commanding. It brought back too many nights of sharp words disguised as guidance, too many mornings of silence disguised as peace. Yet here he stood, adored by everyone, untouched by truth. She felt the boy shift beside her, restless. She squeezed his hand gently. "Almost over," she murmured, though deep down she knew the night was only beginning. As the evening unfolded, Daniel paraded his wealth like a crown. Imported wines flowed freely. Celebrities posed for photographs, and a string quartet played melodies that floated through the air like silk. Cassandra twirled on the dance floor, her gown catching the light as Daniel spun her with a showman's flourish. Every detail screamed perfection, but perfection is fragile, and perfection watched too closely can shatter. From the shadows, Emily's presence went unnoticed at first. Guests were too enamored with the spectacle, too blinded by Daniel's carefully crafted image. But slowly eyes began to wander. A few noticed the woman in the back row, the boy at her side. Whispers stirred, faint at first like a draft slipping under the door. Emily lifted her chin, though her hands still trembled. She hadn't come to cause a scene. She hadn't come for revenge. She came to face the man who once broke her, to stand in the room he thought she'd avoid. But as the whispers spread, she realized something she hadn't expected. Her silence might not protect her. Because the boy sitting beside her, with his familiar features and nervous eyes, was a truth Daniel could not bury forever. Emily's heart pounded as she felt the shift in the room. Somewhere near the front, Daniel's gaze swept over the crowd. His smile held, but for a fleeting moment his eyes narrowed, scanning the shadows. And when his gaze landed on her, his expression flickered. Just for a second. Just enough for her to know he had seen. The violins played louder, the laughter swelled, but beneath the music, a tension coiled like a storm on the horizon. Emily squeezed her son's hand once more. "Stay close," she whispered, because Daniel Royce had noticed. And soon everyone else would too. The night had reached its crescendo. Glasses clinked, cameras flashed, and laughter spilled across the glittering ballroom. Daniel stood in the center like a conductor, orchestrating every moment. His hand rested on Cassandra's waist as though she were an ornament, the final jewel in his crown. Emily sat quietly in the back, her son's small hand still clasped in hers. The hum of conversation blurred into a dull roar in her ears. She tried to remain invisible, to focus only on her breathing, on the quiet strength she had promised herself she would carry tonight. But Daniel had already seen her, and Daniel never ignored an audience. He lifted the microphone with the ease of a man who believed the world was his stage. The music faded, the crowd turned, and Daniel's smile widened into something sharper. "Ladies and gentlemen," he began, his voice smooth, commanding, "thank you for being here to celebrate not just a marriage, but a victory. Love is never simple, is it? Sometimes to find the right path, we stumble down the wrong one first." A ripple of polite laughter moved through the crowd. Cassandra leaned into him, smiling, unaware of the venom laced in his words. Daniel's gaze slid past the glittering guests, cutting toward the shadows at the back. Toward her. "Some people," he continued, his tone tightening, "never really move on. They cling to the past, to old mistakes, to faded promises. They sit in the dark while others shine in the light." The ballroom erupted in nervous chuckles, the kind of laughter people gave when they weren't sure if it was safe not to laugh. Emily's throat tightened. She felt the boy shift beside her, confused, his wide eyes flicking between her face and the man on the stage. "Don't they deserve our pity?" Daniel pressed on, savoring the crowd's unease. "Because while we rise, they remain stuck watching us succeed." The cruelty was deliberate, polished, and performed for everyone to see. It wasn't enough that he had left her. It wasn't enough that he had replaced her. He needed to strip her dignity bare in front of strangers and friends alike. Emily's hands trembled, but she forced them still. resting her palm against her son's small back. He tugged at her sleeve, whispering, "Mama, why is he talking about you?" The words pierced deeper than Daniel's mockery. She turned her face toward him, her voice barely steady. "It doesn't matter," she whispered. But her eyes burned, her chest tight with a fury that threatened to spill. Up front, Daniel basked in the attention, his grin triumphant. Cassandra clapped politely, not understanding the undercurrent, and the guests followed her lead. Yet even in their applause there was tension. Whispers began at the edges. Glances darted toward the back of the room. The more Daniel spoke, the more he revealed the cruelty he thought he could disguise as charm. Emily rose slightly in her seat, then sat back down, fighting the impulse. She had not come to play his games. She had not come to let her son witness her humiliation. But Daniel's voice pressed harder, digging at wounds he knew too well. "Some ghosts," he said, his eyes narrowing toward her, "simply don't know when to leave the room." The boy flinched at the sharpness in his tone. Emily's breath caught. This was no longer a private cruelty. It was a spectacle staged for applause. Something inside her shifted. For years she had endured his dismissals, his gaslighting, his manipulation. But now her child had heard his mockery. Now innocence was caught in the crossfire. That was the breaking point. She straightened in her chair, lifting her chin, her hand firm on her son's shoulder. She did not rise yet, but the decision crystallized inside her with terrifying clarity. This would not end the way Daniel intended. On stage, Daniel laughed, satisfied with his performance. The crowd joined in, though uneasily, their eyes flicking between him and the woman in the shadows. The music resumed, but a different tension gripped the room now, one that Daniel could not control. Emily leaned down, whispering to her son, "Stay close to me." Her voice no longer shook, because the moment he mocked her, child, without even realizing, it was the moment Daniel Royce set his own. Downfall into motion, the laughter had barely settled when Emily pushed her chair back. The scrape of wood against the ballroom floor was quiet, almost insignificant against the music and chatter. But for her it was thunder. She rose, her son's small hand clasped in hers, her black dress falling around her like a shadow reborn. The boy looked up at her, uncertain. His wide eyes caught the glittering lights, the towering figures in gowns and tuxedos. He pressed closer to her side, sensing the weight of her silence. She bent low, whispered steady words into his ear. "Walk with me. Just keep walking." Together they stepped forward. At first no one noticed. The orchestra's strings still swelled, champagne still flowed, and Daniel still wore the satisfied smirk of a man who believed he had triumphed. But as Emily moved further down the aisle of tables, heads began to turn. Whispers flickered like sparks. A ripple of confusion spread through the glittering crowd. Gasps broke out when the boy's face caught the light. His resemblance was uncanny, jawline sharp like Daniel's childhood portraits, eyes the same piercing shade of storm gray, even the nervous half-smile that tugged unconsciously at his lips. It was as if a younger Daniel had walked into the room, hand in hand with the woman he once discarded. Emily said nothing. Her silence was her armor. Each step was deliberate, steady, her heels tapping softly against marble. She didn't rush, didn't falter. She let the stares wash over her, let the whispers grow louder. The boy's small grip anchored her, a reminder that this was not a performance. This was truth, and truth required no words. Daniel saw her before anyone else. For a moment his smirk held, as though he could dismiss her presence as another ghost haunting his stage. But then he saw the child. His smile faltered, just a flicker, but enough. His jaw tightened, his hand stiffening on Cassandra's waist. Cassandra followed his gaze. Her laughter froze on her lips, her champagne glass trembling in her hand. Her eyes darted between Daniel and the boy, confusion giving way to dawning horror. The orchestra stumbled, the melody breaking as even the musicians turned to see what had stolen the air from the room. Emily stopped in the center of the ballroom, directly beneath the chandelier's blaze. She didn't speak. She didn't need to. She simply stood, her son at her side, the resemblance screaming louder than any accusation. The silence that followed was heavier than thunder. Guests shifted uncomfortably in their seats, some covering their mouths, others staring openly, their eyes wide with disbelief. Cameras clicked, capturing the moment, the tension, the undeniable truth unfolding before them. Daniel's throat worked as he tried to summon words, but none came. His arrogance, so polished, so unshakable, cracked in that instant. He could feel the walls closing in, the judgmental gazes, the bride's stiffening posture, the press cameras waiting for a soundbite. Emily's silence stretched, cutting deeper than any insult he had hurled at her. She let it hang. A quiet that forced every eye in the room to study the boy's face, to draw the conclusion themselves. The boy shifted slightly, tugging at her hand. "Mama," he whispered softly, just loud enough to echo in the cavernous hall. The single word rang with innocence, but it landed like a stone-shattering glass. The crowd gasped again. Daniel's chest tightened. He wanted to dismiss it, to wave it away, but the resemblance was undeniable. His polished mask slipped further, the smirk collapsing into something raw, something panicked. Cassandra's hand slipped from his arm. Her face was pale, her eyes locked on the boy as though she were staring at the ghost of Daniel's past made flesh. Emily finally lifted her chin, her gaze sweeping the crowd before locking on Daniel. She did not smile, did not speak, did not grant him the satisfaction of anger. Her silence was heavier than rage, and as the crowd leaned in, waiting for someone, anyone, to break the unbearable quiet, Daniel's empire began to crack. For a moment, no one breathed. The ballroom was suspended in silence, every glittering surface reflecting the impossible resemblance between the boy and the man at the center of it all. Daniel's smirk had collapsed into something taut, brittle. But he was Daniel Royce. He knew how to perform, how to spin truth into illusion. He forced a laugh. It rang too loudly in the still air, brittle where it should have been smooth. "Really?" he said, raising the microphone again. "Is this what we've come to? An ex-wife dragging a child into the spotlight to claw back attention?" His voice cracked slightly, but he pressed on. Pathetic, really. Some guests gave weak, uneasy chuckles, desperate to follow his lead. Others did not move at all. Their eyes darted from Daniel to the boy, studying the sharp jawline, the storm-gray eyes, the nervous half-smile. Whispers grew at the edges of the room, climbing like ivy, suffocating his attempt at dismissal. Emily stood unmoving, her silence unshaken by his performance. She bent down, whispered something to the boy, and he reached into the pocket of his small blazer. With trembling hands, he pulled out a photograph, creased, faded, but still clear. He held it up for the nearest table to see. Gasps broke like a wave. The photograph was of Daniel Royce at 6 years old, his school portrait, face rounder but unmistakable. The boy beside Emily was a mirror of that image, down to the hesitant smile tugging at his lips. Guests surged forward to glimpse it, their whispers sharpening into certainty. "Identical," someone muttered. "It's him." "Oh my God." The press cameras, always hungry, shifted like predators scenting blood. Flash after flash lit the room, catching Daniel's stiffened posture, Cassandra's pale face, Emily's quiet resolve. Cassandra turned to Daniel, her hand trembling as it clutched the fabric of her gown. "What is this?" she demanded, her voice carrying across the hall. "Daniel, tell me this isn't true." Daniel's mask slipped further. He tried to keep the grin, but his jaw twitched, his eyes darted. Panic flickered across his face before he dragged the microphone closer. "This is absurd," he snapped. "She's manipulating all of you. That picture could be fabricated. You think I'd—" But his voice faltered under the weight of the crowd's gaze. They weren't buying it. Not tonight. The photograph was too clear, the resemblance too sharp. His power, the confidence that always bent people to his narrative, was failing. Cassandra's voice rose, sharp and cutting. "You told me everything about your past, Daniel, everything. Was she part of it? Is this child your child?" The boy shrank closer to Emily, gripping her dress. Emily rested her hand on his shoulder, steady and protective. She didn't speak. She didn't need to. Her silence left Daniel alone with the roar of questions he could no longer smother. Guests shifted away from him now, chairs scraping, bodies leaning back as though his arrogance were contagious. Investors whispered to one another. Journalists scribbled furiously. Cameras captured every crack in his composure. Daniel's chest heaved. He opened his mouth to speak, but the words curdled on his tongue. The truth pressed against his throat, heavy and undeniable. And then Cassandra stepped back from him, her face pale, eyes hard. "Answer me," she hissed, her voice trembling with rage. "Is he yours?" The crowd stilled again, waiting. Daniel's mouth opened, but his voice betrayed him. A stammer, a twitch, a silence that spoke louder than Daniel. His face told the truth his lips could not. Emily's hand tightened on her son's shoulder. She turned, guiding him gently through the crowd of shocked faces. The cameras followed, the whispers spreading like wildfire. Behind her, Daniel Royce stood paralyzed, his empire trembling in the weight of a single child's face. By morning, the story had already spread beyond the ballroom. What began as whispers in the wedding hall had become headlines plastered across every newsfeed and gossip column. Photographs of Emily standing silently beneath the chandelier, her son clutching the faded picture of Daniel at 6, had gone viral. The captions were merciless. The child who stole the groom's spotlight. Daniel Royce's secret heirs. From fairy tale wedding to scandal in one night. Daniel woke to the storm with fury burning in his chest. He had spent years curating his image, buying loyalty, bending narratives until truth was whatever he decided. But this was slipping out of his grasp. His phone buzzed nonstop, investors demanding answers, tabloids sniffing at his gates, his new wife refusing to speak to him. Old wounds began reopening in the press. Former mistresses, once silenced with money and threats, suddenly had voices again. Business rivals fed the flames, hinting at Daniel's reckless arrogance, at secrets they had long suspected. Associates from the past described him as a man who thought consequences didn't apply to him. Everywhere he turned, the same questions echoed. Is the boy his son? How long had he kept it hidden? Was Cassandra deceived? Daniel stormed into his office, tie askew, eyes bloodshot. Cameras had already gathered outside, their lenses clicking like insects. He slammed the blinds shut, pacing the polished floor. He needed to act, to regain control, to destroy the woman who had dared to humiliate him. That afternoon, he called a press conference. Standing stiff before a cluster of microphones, his voice dripped with contempt. "This is a malicious attempt to discredit me," he declared. "My ex-wife is manipulative. She has always thrived on pity, and now she drags a child into the spotlight for her own gain. These lies will not stand," reporters shouted questions. "Why does the boy look exactly like you? Will you take a DNA test? Is your new wife leaving you?" Daniel bristled. "No further comments," he snapped, storming off the stage. The footage played on repeat across networks, his anger only deepening the speculation. Meanwhile, Emily said nothing. She ignored requests for interviews, avoided cameras, and remained behind closed doors. Her silence became louder than Daniel's denials. Every day she refused to respond. The narrative tilted further against him. Commentators praised her composure. "She doesn't need to speak," one analyst said. "The child speaks for her." Public sympathy shifted swiftly. What once painted Emily as the abandoned ex now framed her as the quiet survivor of Daniel's cruelty. Cassandra, once radiant, had vanished from public view. Her family issued a statement expressing their deep concern for her well-being. Behind mansion gates, arguments raged, voices raised loud enough for staff to whisper about. Cassandra had demanded answers Daniel could not give, and his silence to her was even more damning than his silence to the press. In the markets, his empire began to tremble. Investors withdrew millions overnight, wary of the scandal tainting his name. Competitors circled like vultures, exploiting his weakness. What Daniel had built on control and image was unraveling thread by thread. Late one night, unable to bear the silence, Daniel called Emily. His voice was sharp, frantic. "Do you realize what you've done? You've ruined me. This is your revenge, isn't it? Admit it." Emily listened quietly. Her son was asleep in the next room, his small breath steady and safe. When Daniel's tirade paused, she spoke only once. "I haven't said a word, Daniel, not one. You've done this all by yourself." She hung up before he could answer, and in that silence, heavier than any accusation, Daniel felt the walls closing in. His empire wasn't collapsing because Emily had spoken. It was collapsing because she hadn't. The knock came just after midnight. Emily had just finished tucking her son into bed when the sound rattled through her small house. She froze, heart tightening. Few people knew where she lived now, and even fewer dared to disturb her. The knock came again, harder. She walked slowly to the door, every instinct telling her not to open it. But she did, and there he was, Daniel Royce. He looked nothing like the polished man from the wedding. His tie was gone, his shirt wrinkled, his eyes bloodshot and wild. For the first time in years, he seemed smaller, stripped of the armor of applause and luxury. Emily, he said, voice hoarse. We need to talk. She didn't move. It's late. You shouldn't be here. Please. His tone cracked, teetering between desperation and command. Just 5 minutes. That's all I ask. Against her better judgment, she stepped aside. He brushed past her into the living room, pacing like a caged animal. The shadows clung to him, amplifying the twitch in his jaw, the tremor in his hands. You have to stop this, he began, voice sharp. The press, the whispers, it's tearing everything apart. My investors, my marriage, my name. You think I don't know what this is? Revenge, Emily crossed her arms. I haven't said a word, Daniel. You did this yourself, his laugh was hollow. Don't play saint. You walked into my wedding with him. You knew exactly what you were doing. He leaned closer, lowering his voice. But it doesn't have to end like this. From his jacket pocket, he pulled a folded checkbook, slamming it onto the table. Name your price. Whatever it takes. I'll provide for the boy. I'll give you security, comfort. Just disappear again. Sign the papers, keep your mouth shut, and I'll make sure you never struggle another day in your life. Emily stared at the checkbook, then at him. Memories surged. Nights of belittlement, mornings of silence, years of her life spent trading dignity for survival. Slowly, she shook her head. You think money fixes everything, but it doesn't erase what you did to me. It doesn't erase who you are. Daniel's face tightened. Don't be foolish. This is more than you can handle. They'll chew you up. They'll chew him up. I'm the only one who can protect you. No, she said firmly. You're the one we need protection from. For a moment, the mask cracked completely. His eyes darkened, his voice dropping to a low growl. You think you're strong now? You think silence makes you powerful? I made you. Without me, you'd still be nothing. Do you understand that? Emily's hands trembled, but she did not back down. You didn't make me. You broke me, and I left because one day I realized I could still put myself back together. Without you. His jaw clenched. He stepped closer, looming, his breath hot with fury. But when she didn't flinch, when her eyes stayed locked on his with quiet resolve, something in him faltered. You'll regret this, he whispered, but the words lacked conviction. No, she replied softly. The only thing I regret is ever letting you convince me your love was real. The silence that followed was heavier than any argument they had ever had. For the first time, Daniel saw a truth he couldn't bend, a wall he couldn't buy. His power over her was gone. He backed away, chest heaving, eyes darting. He looked like a man who had lost not just control but identity. And when he finally stormed out, slamming the door behind him, Emily exhaled a breath she hadn't realized she was holding. Upstairs, her son stirred in his sleep, but did not wake. Emily sat in the quiet house, the echoes of Daniel's threat still lingering. For the first time, she felt the shape of something new. Freedom. Daniel Royce had always believed his empire was indestructible. For years, his name carried weight in boardrooms, on glossy magazine covers, in hushed conversations among the powerful. But now, the same name was everywhere for a different reason, and every headline was poison. Secret child scandal. Royce fortune in jeopardy. Billionaire bride betrayed at the altar of truth. Within days, his investors began to pull out. Stocks in his companies plummeted, leaving holes no speech could repair. Partners canceled deals, unwilling to risk association with a man whose lies now trended daily. Daniel tried to claw back control, calling emergency meetings, issuing statements, blaming Emily at every turn. But his words only fanned the fire. The tabloids feasted on every detail. They replayed the video of Emily's silent entrance until it became iconic. The chandelier blazing above her, the boy clutching her hand, Daniel's face caught between arrogance and panic. The still images became symbols of betrayal and downfall. Memes spread across social media. The mighty Royce meets his mirror. Cassandra was the first to abandon him. Their marriage, barely days old, had already withered under the weight of suspicion. She released a carefully worded statement through her family. I was deceived. I will not remain in a union built on lies. Behind closed doors, she moved out of their penthouse, escorted by her parents while reporters swarmed the lobby. Daniel watched from the window as her car disappeared into traffic. For the first time, he felt something he couldn't spin, couldn't silence: fear. Meanwhile, Emily shielded her son from the chaos. Paparazzi camped outside her small house, flashes exploding at every sighting, but she kept her curtains drawn and her words few. Neighbors whispered, journalists called, lawyers sent letters. She ignored them all. Her silence, once born of fear, had become her strongest shield. She spent her days grounding her son in normalcy. Breakfast at the same table, school runs with careful detours, bedtime stories whispered low while the world outside demanded more of her. She knew the boy was too young to fully understand, but he sensed the shift. "Why do people take pictures of me, Mama?" he asked one night, his eyes wide. Emily brushed the hair from his forehead. "Because they see something important in you," she answered softly. "But to me, you're just you. That's all that matters." The boy nodded, comforted by her calm. For Daniel, the boy became the living reminder of everything he had tried to bury. Every article carried side-by-side images of the child's face and his own school portrait. Journalists dug into archives, unearthing photos, testimonies, even whispers from old employees who remembered Emily's quiet disappearance years before. The truth was undeniable now, etched into the child's features. Daniel lashed out in interviews, his composure cracking further each time. "This is a witch hunt," he barked at one reporter. "She's using that boy to destroy me." But the more he spoke, the more unhinged he sounded. Even his loyal supporters began to drift away. His empire crumbled in real time. Bankers tightened their fists, creditors demanded repayment, and the glossy veneer of success peeled away to reveal a desperate man clawing at the ruins. His name, once a brand, had become a warning. Emily watched from a distance, not with glee, but with resignation. She hadn't sought revenge, only survival. She had built her strength in silence, and now, silence carried her through. As Daniel's world cracked apart, hers grew smaller, steadier, centered on the boy who looked so much like him. She knew storms still loomed, but she also knew this. Daniel's grip on her life had finally broken, and in the fragments of his empire, she began to see the shape of her own peace. The frenzy faded slowly like a storm exhausting itself. Weeks passed, and the headlines that once screamed Daniel Royce's scandal dulled into background noise. New stories took their place, another celebrity affair, another political disaster. But for Daniel, the silence that followed was not peace. It was emptiness. He sat alone in his penthouse, the vast rooms echoing with absence. Cassandra was gone. His investors gone. Even his staff reduced to a skeleton crew that avoided his gaze. The phone no longer rang with opportunity. It rang only with demands. Debts, lawsuits, questions he could not answer. He poured himself another drink, staring at the city lights sprawled beyond the glass. Once they had been his kingdom. Now they looked like a world he no longer belonged to. His reflection in the window startled him. A man aged in weeks, eyes hollow. The smirk that once carried him through scandals nowhere to be found. Across town, Emily lived a different silence. One not born of loss, but of healing. The park was nearly empty that morning. Autumn leaves carpeted the paths in russet and gold. Emily walked slowly, her son's hand in hers, the chill air nipping at their cheeks. For the first time in years, she felt free. No cameras followed her, no questions pressed against her lips. The chaos had burned itself out, leaving only space. The boy skipped a few steps ahead, then stopped to collect a leaf, holding it up with a smile. "It looks like a star," he said proudly. Emily knelt beside him, brushing his hair back, her eyes soft. "It does," she replied. "Keep it. A reminder of today. Today. An ordinary morning. Ordinary but precious." She realized that this was her victory. Not the headlines, not Daniel's ruin, but the quiet moments she could finally share with her son without fear. Her revenge was not in shouting, nor in spectacle. It was in surviving him, in building a life where his shadow no longer reached. Somewhere people still whispered about her. They debated whether she had planned it, whether she had orchestrated Daniel's downfall. But Emily knew the truth. She hadn't needed to speak. The boy had spoken for her simply by existing. She rose, taking his hand again, and they continued down the path. Birds scattered from the trees above, their wings catching the light. The sound was gentle, almost like applause, but this time it belonged to no one but them. Back in his penthouse, Daniel scrolled through his phone, searching for fragments of the life he once owned. Every article, every photograph brought him back to the same image. Emily standing in silence, her son at her side. That boy's face haunted him, the jawline, the eyes, the undeniable resemblance. It was a mirror he couldn't shatter no matter how hard he tried. He hurled the phone across the room, glass shattering on marble. The noise echoed, then died, leaving only the hollow quiet of a man alone with the consequences of his choices. Emily, unaware of his rage, reached the end of the park path. She paused, watching her son run ahead, his laughter carrying through the crisp morning air. Her chest ached, not with grief but with gratitude. She had survived. She had endured, and now she was free. She whispered softly to herself, words the wind carried away. Justice doesn't always need a voice. Her son ran back to her, leaf still in hand, his smile wide. She took it, tucked it into her pocket, and together they walked on, two figures moving forward, leaving shadows behind. And far away, Daniel Royce sat in silence, facing the only verdict that mattered, the emptiness of a life he had destroyed with his own hands. If this story resonated with you, subscribe to the channel and like, spread the word, and tell us where you're watching from.